So, to practice for the upcoming tournament in about 2 hours, I have a game against Mucket. Brought my very standard Vampire Coast build, and I'm going to be testing it out. So far, it seems to have fared very well against most Empire builds. So, excited to see I'll be able to hold off this army. What do we got? We got 2 great cannons up against this build. They're going to be firing away at the deck gunners. However, I can spread out the deck gunners, and they should be more or less fine. As for the pistoliers, I gotta make sure I don't make the mistake of accidentally turning them sideways to shoot at the pistoliers. Otherwise, what'll happen is they will get absolutely murdered by the great cannon. So instead, I'm just gonna shoot at Volkmar. We bring him down to about half HP right off the bat. And he does drop a banishment on my poor zombies, but they actually mostly make it out of that. Banishment heads away from the caster, so you can pretty consistently, you can pretty consistently dodge banishments by doing that. Now for the front line, I need to get engaged at this point, as it is pretty important that I actually disrupt these archers. Firing away, getting in loads of damage onto my forces, and yeah, archers are going to be the main priority. I'm also going to focus down the Bright Wizard. He is a threat because of Burning Head and so on and so forth. So focus fire on him, and then wheel my dogs around to the center to start clearing up these Empire forces. As for Volkmar, we're keeping a close eye on him. If he gets any closer to me, then I'll turn guns and fire on top of him. And then I should be a-okay. In fact, I have a unit of handguns right here that can start focus firing him down. And then the deck gunners can start focusing him too, since we have routed off the Empire's Bright Wizard. So that out of the way. Just a little bit of focus fire on Volkmar, and that's basically it. The Empire Knights are getting punished by the Sirens, as is usual. And if I can even get Noctilus to heal up these Sirens, then that would be very good for me. So I'm going to pull them towards Noctilus. Then the dogs are going to clean up the rest. There are a few Empire Knights over here. They're not particularly scary, as of course we have guns, turn and fire on top of them. And they'll probably just die out before they can get too much damage. Curvy dogs, just avoiding Volkmar as much as they can. Then that should basically be game. Now the pistoliers, they are going to kill off my... my deck gunners, unfortunately. I don't have too much defense against that. But at this point, I have enough of a lead where it is no problem at all. The handguns will mostly be able to carry in this situation. And if the deck gunners, even if a single deck gunner unit survives, that's already a pretty bad scenario for the Empire. Now for my scurvy dogs, they have taken quite a bit of damage. I'm going to see if I can go ahead and save them by bringing them closer to Noctilus for a heal. And that pick-me-up should be enough for these guys to kill off the rest of the Empire forces. You really need them for cleanup because, as you can see, as the crossbowmen actually rally, they can start causing a few problems in the backline. So it's very important that you have these scurvy dogs. Very standard Vampire Coast play, really. You have lost all the deck gunners, but I still have hand gunners. And they have enough ammunition in the late game to kill off Volkmar, so he's not really a problem. And that's basically it. You're scared of running gun builds versus ODM players, and Call Harmon says clearly it still works. Yeah, this was actually pretty straightforward too. Yeah, they do have a lot of practice versus gun builds, so you will have to play it pretty proficiently if you want to survive. But it's definitely within the realms of possibility to get pretty clean wins with gun builds. In fact, this build specifically is why I consider the Empire versus Coast matchup not too scary. The Empire, they have a lot of archers, but they tend to be more expensive. And Vampire Coast. Yeah, just the deck gunner's really hard carry here. Can even go flying bombers at all. It all works nice and well. There we go. GG. Take a look at some values. Deck gunners, amazing. Hand gunners, even more amazing. In fact, really, the major misplay was the Scurvy Dogs. I could have microed them a tiny bit better. They got charged by cavalry. But otherwise, this build is still very strong. And this is post-nerf too. Imagine this build before the nerf. This would be basically impossible for Empire to win. Good times, good times. Okay, so this next game, Dark Elves against Empire. We're seeing a couple great cannons over here. Malekith. Dodging is going to be very important here. There's some silver bullets, I can tell, in this gap probably, or maybe this one. We'll ignore them for now. And then just try to get a bit of poking damage in with these crossbows. If any huntsmen reveal themselves, I'll have to pull back. And the goal is just to get my front line engaged with the Empire front line. Malekith, with his Gaze of Malice, should do well against these great swords too. And given that I have executioners, the great swords are actually going to be in for a pretty rough time. So, pretty excited for that. Gaze of Malice is going to be getting thrown down on top of these the huntsmen, and then a breath attack on the great swords. We'll see how effective that is. They are on the move. Looks like they dodge most of the shots, unfortunately. And I'd say that was a tiny bit of a misplay, but I forget to use my breath attacks anyways, so I'm sure it may even be a minor win for me. Now, the goal is to get my executioners onto the great swords, then my corsairs onto the rest of the Empire infantry. As for all of these huntsmen, I guess the goal right now is just try to disrupt them as much as I can. I can send in Malekith to go ahead and do that. Should do okay there, but you can't stay for long. I'll have to pull him away. And let's see, some Empire Knights too actually charging into my forces is going to be a little bit of an issue. There's an Archlector on his mount. It looks like we're going to have a bit of a large engagement underway. So far though, the fact that the executioners are still alive is definitely quite good. Not to mention I have another breath attack here to support my executioners. And it just depends on whether or not I can win this front line, I guess. The huntsmen have been able to fire away freely though. But they're firing in at my repeater crossbows. That's a plus and a minus for me, as the crossbowmen. I'll be able to push the front line a bit harder, but the huntsmen will be starting to punish my my actual main source of damage. So it really depends on if I'm able to break through the front line. And in this case, this flank over here looks like it's going to go pretty well in my favor in just a second. However, on the left flank, things have sort of fallen apart. I still have a full HP unit of executioners, but it's going to be a little bit of a close one. However, with the mass terror route from Malekith, I should be able to finally break through, then actually shut down some of these huntsmen. The executioners can just march right on forwards. I'll be chasing Empire Knights off the battlefield, and we'll see if it was worth it ignoring these huntsmen for so long. They definitely did quite a bit of damage, but now there's not a ton of cavalry left for the forces of the Empire. Their healer is also routed off, so I'm feeling okay about the situation. I finally shut down a unit of huntsmen too, but the balance of power, it's not in my favor. Yeah, and that's going to be a bit of a problem. But I still have my executioners online. We've routed off these huntsmen. I need to make sure that I finish chasing them off, and with some of my cavalry coming back, I think I should be okay. Not to mention my repeater crossbows can start shutting down the actual artillery here. And then after the artillery is down, I'll use my remaining repeater crossbows to chase off the Empire Knights, I think. Still though, a very close game. Malekith is still fairly healthy though, and I think that's going to be a pretty big help. And if he can snipe out the Archlector, that would be pretty huge for me. The fact that I do still have a few Executioners at high HP is definitely good too. But I'm feeling like this will probably be a pretty close game. The Archlector too, he also gets a Soulfire and Bombardment on my Executioners. They are pretty elite, so they won't be routing easily anytime soon. Be able to route off the Great Swords. With the support of Malekith, I think I'll be okay on that front. Great Cannons are getting routed off. And let's see here. The biggest threat to Malekith right now are probably these Huntsmen. I'll need to deal with them with my Executioners. There's also a unit of Cavalry at pretty high HP. So you know what? I'm instead actually just going to dive directly onto these Huntsmen with Malekith. And just take them out so the Empire doesn't have any more ranged forces. From there, it's just going to be the Cannon and the Cavalry and an Archlector. Then I think I'll be okay. Definitely a very close game though. And the Artillery, it even turns towards my Cavalry. And I'm going to need to use Malekith to kill off these Knights of the Blazing Sun. They're definitely going to be a bit of an issue. In fact, they're looking to chase off these crossbowmen. It will give me some time to kill off the artillery piece. And let's see here. Hopefully, Malekith is able to finish off these Empire Knights. There are a few Knights too on the flanks. But given that I do have my skirmishers alive, I think I'll be okay. In fact, the balance of power actually goes back into my favor as this cannon routes off. And just the blob of Malekith and the Executioners are looking to be able to handle any situation here. They have very high damage, terror, and mass with Malekith, so cycle charging from the Archlector won't be possible. And yeah, I think I should be okay. Now, it's looking like he might want to send in another Soulfire and Bombardment onto my Executioners, but they're at, well, actually, another Soulfire would actually kill them all off, so that'd be a bit scary. I'm waiting on my Soul Stealer right now, I guess, to come back online. And as soon as I have that back up, the game is done, but at 4 Winds of Magic, it's going to take a while. And this surround of cavalry and spears on top of Malekith is going to be a tiny bit scary. Thankfully, I do have another unit of spears to back me up. And the constant crossbowmen fire onto these Empire Knights looks like it's going to get them off the battlefield. In fact, they terror route, which means that Malekith can turn around and fight the Archlector. He runs away, which means I'll finally get a pretty clean disengage using Malekith. We'll be good to go. Save Gaze of Malice for silver bullets. Would have been a good idea, but in this case, there just weren't any silver bullets. They could have been hidden away. So it was a little bit of a sketchy situation, for sure. But yes, generally you want to use your Gaze of Malice on them if they're more clumped up. Now, the cannon is back online. Gonna be a bit of an issue. My spears are getting a tiny bit compromised, but one thing I can do is just send all my forces onto this cannon, wait for the Empire to clump up their forces, and then yeah, and then just use that big old Soul Stealer to tear them up. If they do decide to blob up, gonna be a pretty advantageous fight for Malekith. And here we go, all the forces are blobbed up, and the last minute Soul Stealer, casting that as soon as I can before Malekith gets routed off. Don't you dare rout off, Malekith. Don't you dare rout off. There we go, it looks like he just barely keeps it together. And then the Soul Stealer is gonna be shredding most of the infantry here. Still though, Malekith is very low. He's not facing towards the Archlector, which means that he's not attacking him. And it looks like Malekith might actually go down, surprisingly enough, despite the Soul Stealer. That Archlector did a lot of damage, but he gets terror routed. And come on, terror routes abound. Easiest game of my life. Definitely not even close in the slightest. Malekith nearly routing off there, but just barely keeping it together. What a mad lad. And with some repeater crossbow fire, I should be able to rout off these Knights of the Blazing Sun. I'll land Malekith on top of the Lord. And the game's not over yet. I see the predictions are coming on in. But there we go. The Empire Knights are routed off again. And that's gonna be it. Alright, so I think yeah, that last minute Soul Stealer definitely saved my life. The Huntsmen, they were online for way too long. Usually I wouldn't go for Executioners, but they did actually do pretty well. Although having more infantry to loop around the sides of the Empire formation, it really lets you get on top of the Huntsmen a lot faster. Same with the artillery. In this case, I was sort of just eating that fire for a really long time. Alternatively, I could have played my cavalry better to push into the backline. The Knights of the Blazing Sun came out very far ahead in that fight, and possibly a cavalry overload would have done me better. But still, very fun, and GG. We got Sora Spears here. It's going to be a Lizardman box against my Bretonians. Temple Guard in the back. We'll start focus firing them as soon as we can. And then the game is going to revolve around whether or not I can use my archers effectively. Pick apart this army. Mazdamundi, of course. Very proficient at killing off archers and so on. Oh, and there's Pterodon riders in the back. Nice. Almost got jebaited by advancing my army forwards. Yes, I thought this army was a bit small. Of course, the Pterodon riders, they are here to punish the trebuchets, to punish the archers, and it's up to the paladin and Lewin to prevent that. Now this first trebuchet, I'm gonna drop it and then pull away so that the rock drops don't kill off too many of them. And then the paladin, he's gonna be trying to prevent these Pterodon riders from dropping rocks. Looks like drop rocks does go down. Kills off a couple of peasants, but I've routed off one of the Pterodons. The other one looks like he'll be routing off soon enough too. And yeah, with the support of the paladin, it looks like I'll actually be killing off most of these Pterodon riders. That's definitely very good for me, as they're needed to actually kill off archers in the late game. And with so many archers, I feel like the Lizardmen, they could be in for a couple issues. Of course, solar engines are going to be good versus my archers, but not this many. I actually have a bit of a threat overload. These guys. Lewin chasing off one of the Pterodons. That's very good for me. The poison is coming into effect too. It's slowing them down, making them much less effective. As the front line finally engages, I'm going to see if these peasants have what it takes. Most of the Pterodons are going to be gone though. Like this one runs off the battlefield. And now it's Mazdamundi and this Lizardman blob. It's essentially going to operate a bit like a kite game right now with my peasant archers. They're going to be spreading out as much as they can. And the Lizardmen forces, they can't really spread out to catch all of these archers because I have my cavalry at the ready to punish them if they get any close. Paladin just moving in. He's going to chase off the rest of those Pterodons, and I think I've secured myself a pretty nice lead. Peasant archers now are just firing away happily. And even without trebuchets, Mazdamundi has his work cut out for him to actually kill off all of these guys. But it does look like Mukup is going for the long haul. He's actually not advancing very much. And is instead choosing to tank the peasant archer damage. I haven't seen this before. We'll see how well it actually works. Shots ring out towards my damsel. She takes a tiny bit of damage, but soon enough I'm going to have Lewin here. He's going to throw down his armor debuff. And that's going to be punishing this Lizardman formation pretty hard. As he'll essentially just be able to reduce their armor to nothing. And in fact, I might even be able to kill off the solar engines with these archers right now. The Lewin, he's just going to go and park himself right on top. Armor debuff is down. Solar engine is taking quite a bit of damage. That's very good for me. And Lewin himself isn't too worried about getting shot up. Here we go. It's just whether or not I have enough ammunition. Which, you know, that question, it's actually a bit of an interesting one, because ammunition is actually beginning to run out, surprisingly enough. But if I can kill off this solar engine, that would be the best case scenario. as that is a huge loss of ammunition for the Lizardmen, and that's very good. Solar Engine is down. Next up is Mazdamundi and the other Solar Engine. Now, my Bowmen actually do pretty good damage to Mazdamundi despite his high armor. The problem with him is that he generally doesn't have... he can't really take this much archer fire. It's a lot of archers. He definitely doesn't want to be stuck in a fight there. And he uses banishment on my archers, which means that my knights have a free ride killing off the Solar Engine. Now, Ruination of Cities could have dropped already. Which means that if there was a Ruination of Cities, these knights actually would have had a pretty rough time. But given that they're not dead already, I think this is going to be a good play. And I'll be able to snipe off the Solar Engine. The archers will be able to pick off the... they'll be able to pick off these Lizardmen Temple Guard and Saurus Warriors now that their backs are presented. And then, once the Solar Engine is chased off the map, I'll be good to go. Really, the biggest threat is Mazdamundi. And that's basically it. The Knights are more than enough to kill off all the infantry if they don't have any monstrous support. And even though I did lose all my trebuchets, they even rallied in the late game, and they're going to be hard carrying here. There we go, the Solar Engines are both down at this point, and now the archers can focus down Mazdamundi, and it's going to be a pretty straightforward win. I didn't even really need my Paladin to help in this blob fight, although it was definitely bad that I totally forgot about him. Now, the archers, they are beginning to run out of ammo. That is actually going to be a bit of an issue. But it doesn't really matter. It's going to be army losses for the Lizardmen. And that's going to be it. Okay. Pretty surgical, actually. Yeah, just standing there getting filled with arrows. Usually, as the Lizardmen, what you want to do is you want to be pushing forwards and killing off these archers. If they get all of their volleys off, you can see easily they get twice their value in damage. It's a very bad idea to do that. As for the trebuchets, sacrificing the Pterodon riders to kill them off, pretty bad too. You usually want to leave these guys at the ready in the late game. Dive in on top of the archers, drop rocks, and then actually kill them off. If you don't do that, you'll get what happened here, and it's pretty rough for sure. And that's it. GG. So this next match gonna be swapped builds this time. I'm going for the Lizardmen up against Muckip's Bretonia, and I'm going to use these Pterodons to shut down the archers. They are the priority target here, even though the trebuchets do a lot of damage to my Saurus. Their DPS is generally pretty low, and a lot of the times Pterodon riders will do pretty well too. So I'm actually going to overload a bit on the Pterodon riders. They're gonna focus mostly on this left flank, because Mazdamundi and my Temple Guard and Saurus Warriors, they instead are going to be focusing over here on the right side of the formation. I'm also going to pick off some of these trebuchet models to start off with, and then wait to see if these archers actually turn to face the Pterodon riders, because the Solar Engines in that case actually will really shred through their formations and get a lot of damage off. There we go. Pretty mediocre shot. It actually misses pretty hard, but now that the archers are a bit split up, I can actually begin diving in onto this flank. The Pterodon riders, we have the 3 archers over here, perfectly in line for me to snipe out. And then my formation is just going to march straight on forwards. Lewin is nowhere near. Then Mazdamundi start throwing down his AoE spells as soon as those guys stop moving. So Pterodon riders are moving in. Should be able to get a pretty nasty drop box there. And then let's see here, a banishment over here. Nice drop box number 1 and number 2. That's gonna be, wow, it actually missed the archers pretty hard. That's pretty unfortunate, but I'm still doing fairly good. Mazdamundi, with his abilities, he'll be able to protect most of these guys. And then the Pterodons, they're going to be still on disruption duty. There aren't a ton of knights here, so they actually can't defend all the archers. My Bretonia build probably could have been optimized with more knights, but yeah, that's going to be the general idea. For the cavalry, as soon as they get close, you can use Mazdamundi to punish them. Or not Mazdamundi, you can use your solar engines to punish them. And with a net on top of them too, they shouldn't be able to get any too vicious charges onto Mazdamundi. So that should be going pretty fine, but Mazdamundi, he is taking quite a bit of damage, and he's going to need to evacuate away from Lewin. Definitely not a fight I want to stay in for too long, as he is taking quite a bit of damage. I need my spears on top of him, and as soon as they're there, Mazdamundi's going to be a lot safer. Nice. For my Saurus, they can now begin spreading out to start shutting down archers themselves. The solar engines, they're going to be doing a mix of fighting off Lewin and let's see here. Yeah, a mix of shooting at Lewin and the Paladin and the Cavalry. Basically, whatever expensive unit they can actually hit, that's going to be my priority. As for Mazdamundi, he'll be pumping heals into himself, slowly but surely bringing him back up to high HP. And it looks like the solar engines, this hill over here, has been causing a lot of problems for me. Essentially, I haven't really been able to get effective shots here. They've been missing these field trebuchets too, but now that my solar engines have actually crested the hill, we're seeing the knights, they're going to be taking quite a bit of damage. If I can net on top of them, that would be even better. It seems like that might not be a possibility, so I'll just keep poking away at them with these solar engines. Lewin is extremely tanky, so I don't expect to really, I don't think I'll actually be able to kill him until the late game with all of these spears. But currently, he does actually land in over here. A pretty opportunistic fight for me. I have, yeah, I have a ton of spears and the ROR Temple Guard at the ready to help Mazdamundi. There are a couple archers over here that are shooting into the mix, but I should be able to rout them off pretty quickly. And yeah, it looks like the Paladin might even get caught. I'll throw down a net on top of him, pin him down, and then if Mazdamundi can pick him off, that would be a pretty nice win for me. And at this point, these archers are now off the battlefield, which means that the damage just from one of them is going to be extremely low. And as long as Mazdamundi doesn't die to Lewin here, I think I should be okay. He's taking a lot of damage, so constantly pulling him away to safety should help me out a lot. And with another banishment over here, most of these knights should actually be dying. And there we go, it drops. The knights rout off almost immediately. And I've secured a pretty nice blob over here. Both of the solar engines being alive too is pretty great. But Lewin, again, going in for the charge in on Mazdamundi. But this time he has no more support and surrounded by anti-large infantry. I think I should actually be able to win this fight pretty decisively. The solar engines too give a really nice debuff. Basically a Helm of Discord debuff on Lewin. And with the damage and the huge combat prowess increase from Mazdamundi with the solar engines, Lewin's going to be routed off. And with the net on top of him, that would be enough to kill him off. But in this case, Mukip taps out. That's going to be game. This is much more how you want to try playing out the Lizardmen. It really comes down to how well you can shut down these archers with the Pterodon Riders. They still got quite a bit of value, but not enough, as the cavalry died out pretty quickly. And yeah, just having so much of an infantry advantage really helps out. The solar engines too really pulled their weight. And they're really important for killing off Lewin because of that, because of the melee stat debuffs. But this next game is going to be a Rush Tomb King build up against a very elite high elf frontline. Wow. 2 Sword Masters of Hoeth and a ton of Spearmen. No Silver in Guard this time around, but Sisters of Averlorn have revealed themselves. So, right off the bat, the Necropolis Knights, their job, just moving on forwards and taking that flank. Scorpions should be able to do pretty well here. Necropolis Knights, they will win against the Silver Helms, against Dragon Princes, maybe less. The Chariots are going to be busting through the center. Now, the Sisters of Averlorn, first volley goes off, misses Cetra, as I do manage to pull off a pretty nice dodge there. Then another volley comes in. looking to fire at my Tomb Scorpion. I dodge a little bit worse that time, and they are worse for wear because of it. Now, the goal here, it's purely on disruption with the Nehekar Horsemen Scorpions to kill off the Sword Masters. And then I'm just trying to bust through the front line, really. Let's see if I'm able to do that. Etc. Diving in straight on top of these guys. And will the horsemen be able to pull through? The Necropolis Knights are going to have a bit of their work cut out for them too. And as for Cetra, let's throw a bit of a buff on top of them, and then get ready to add to throw down a wind spell on top of these Sisters of Avalorn. As for the Sword Masters, with the chariots, I'm not too worried about them. And as long as the Dragon Princes go down, I'm feeling okay. But Muckup's doing a good job keeping them away from my Necropolis Knights. And in fact, they're even going to get a pretty scary charge in on Cetra. I don't expect them to die especially quickly, but definitely going to be a little bit of a dicey situation. Yeah, let's see how Cetra doing. He's doing okay, but actually, yeah, he's doing fairly good, so never mind. As for the Dragon Princes, I've killed off one of them. And it looks like the Dragon Princes, they will be mostly shut down in just a second. Which means that really the last threat is going to be the Sword Masters of Hoeth. The Breath attack will be shutting down my Tomb Scorpion, but I have another one where that's from. So not too bad. And with just a bit of cycle charging, I don't think these Sword Masters are going to be too much of a problem, as long as I can keep these chariots alive. That's definitely going to be no guarantee. As for this Archmage of High Magic, I'm charging it with my Knights, pinning her down with their pretty insane mass. And it looks like that's going to be the end of this High Elf build. Just a very brutal surround here. And just a collapse on the back line, really securing the situation. This case, I think my build had a pretty nice advantage against Muckup's army. Essentially, he couldn't really do much to these halberds, and his backline was compromised a little bit too easily. Gonna be it, GG. Cool. Take a look at some values. The game ended pretty quickly. In fact, the Skeleton Horsemen did really well. I guess when they dived in onto the bolt throwers, that's where they got most of their value. And the Necropolis Knights are very amazing versus cavalry. Basically designed to kill off cavalry, and they shut down even the Fireborn fairly effectively. The only downside is that they're very expensive, and they run the risk of getting sniped out. So it's Tomb Kings versus Greenskins. Garsnik immediately gonna stealth up these forces to make them unspottable. We'll save them from any giants, but in this case it doesn't look like that'll be the case. Instead, the army is going to be a couple skirmishers, some catapults, and that's about it. So really I just have to advance, try and collapse this front line of 1,000,000 skeletons. They are pretty well lined up for a Fanatic Bomb. So I'm going to try and get my Fanatics in there as quickly as I can. The trolls will just dive right on in. And a bit of a misplay, I did leave some of my infantry here exposed to chariots. Now, there's no real saving them at this point. Basically as good as dead. So I'm just going to abandon them for a better frontline engagement. My archers can turn to fire if needed, and I have my skirmishers on the flank ready to assist. Now, for the frontline engagement, looks like Cetra diving right into my goblins. That's going to be pretty brutal, as I need them to be at high HP for their Fanatic Bombs. They already take a good amount of damage, and my flank is getting pretty exposed, so this looks like it may be a little bit of a scary engagement. I have killed off quite a few skeletons so far, but the worry is my front line. It's in a bit of a dicey position. However, I'm in a nice sort of a blobbish defensive formation here. And with my anti-large now propped, the chariot should be going down pretty quickly. Garsnik does decently against Cetra too. And with the Sphinx now slowed, I expect it should actually go down fairly quickly. As for my skirmishers, they're doing okay on the sides. And you know what? I'm gonna throw down the fermented fungi. I want to kill off this Sphinx quickly as I can, as that will reduce the single entity count of the Tomb Kings by quite a bit. So I'm going to Force Path a few trolls around the backside of it, and that'll make sure that it gets pinned down, even after the fermented fungi wears off. River Trollhag can go over and Spirit Leech it, and then Skarsnik will just continue to duel out Cetra. Really, the biggest problem here for me right now is the fact that these chariots are causing quite a few problems. But the front line has been won pretty handily. The Sphinx goes down, and I think this game is pretty well set in my favor. The skirmishers actually aren't terribly scary. They're really good at chasing off many of my forces, but my trolls aren't really close to routing off. So despite the chariots or the skirmishers being a threat in case things go bad, as long as things actually stay pretty clean for me in terms of the engagement, I should be good. And with another Fanatic Bomb, that's going to be the end of the Tomb King's front line. Stone Trolls are diving in on top of Cetra, and with a Fermented Fungi coming up, he will very likely be falling here. The Chariots too are even beginning to fall apart, and yeah, at this point I just have to march out and kill off this piece of artillery for the Tomb Kings. Probably the biggest threat now at this point. Cetra looks like he wants to engage, but he can't really get any closer to this formation because the threat of being slowed and fungied is a little bit too great. Now, as he turns around, I'll throw down the fermented fungi. He's reached his HP threshold, where that will work by quite a significant margin. And with the anti-large buff on Skarsnik, Cetra's going to be in for a really rough time. Even if he does have any physical resist buffs, the damage is going to be a bit too great. I think that's going to be game. Just a really brutal classic greenskin build of yore. You don't see the Black Orc Big Boss very often anymore, but he still definitely pulls his weight. The immune to psychology really kept the trolls in there for a long time. They paid for themselves. And really, one of, actually, surprisingly enough, the 8-peak loonies, I thought they would have done better with their fanatics, but I guess it was just mostly skeletons. But there we go. Essentially ignoring the skirmishers all game helped out pretty well too. Skirmishers are good in a more long drawn out game, but if you're getting rushed, it's important to be aware of their weaknesses, even though they could have been shooting at savage orcs, just not a ton of value on them. So this next match is going to be Chaos vs Dwarves. I was just about to go into the cheeses that the dwarves can bring. It's boxes, missile spam, or an air force. Against missile spam, I have some horse masters to pin down the range units and 2 chariots, which should be enough to shut down any of that style of play. 2 manticores in the air plus the horse masters can deal with any gyrocopter squad, and Sartorial with Final Transmutation will be able to shut down any boxes that are a bit too tight. The infantry too, fairly elite. Chaos Warrior great weapons. They'll do pretty well as long as they're not taking too many bombs. So let's see how that goes. For the forces of Muckip, we are seeing a cannon, a master engineer, interestingly enough, Thorgrim Grudgebearer. It does give bonus melee attack, so it looks like the dwarves actually going for a pretty hard melee fight build. Giant Slayers too, alright, I'm liking this build. Now the Giant Slayers, I'll be hitting them up with the Marauder Horse Masters. Then for the artillery, it looks like they're going to be firing in onto my chariots. Dodge that as best as I can. The warriors, Chaos Warriors, need to be advancing as quickly as they can so that I can actually engage on this front line. And then we'll see if I can win it. The chariots have taken a lot of damage, and that is one of my banes. My micro is generally have a pretty hard time microing against cannons. They actually tend to hit me more often than not. So if you want to beat me, I say go for artillery. Although that time I do finally dodge one of the shots, and we're going to have this frontline engagement underway very soon. Marauder Horsemen going to be on top of these axe giant slayers. And Sartorial, he's going to dive right on in like an absolute madman. Sartorial, he is extremely hard to kill and generally not worth really fighting as the dwarves. So he should actually be able to disrupt this line of hammerers. And then the rest of my forces will be able to dive on in. Hopefully get some pretty good damage. The first things first, the chariots are going to blast on in. The Chaos Warriors with great weapons are diving in too. And one of the goals is shutting down the Rangers and the blasting charges. The Dwarf Warriors with what's it? These the Hammerers will win in a straight up fight, so I'm actually not going to give them that. I'm going to be throwing down as many debuffs as I can to really punish them, and hopefully get them routed off early. Sartorial cycle charging between them too, and if I can get a terror route from them, that would be great. And there we go, they are routed off, and yeah, just putting in enough shock damage, really helping me out in that situation. Which means that the frontline fight is now mine, and I just simply have to push through with my forces now, and collapse in onto the dwarf backline. Thorgrim is strong, but he won't do too well against two Manticores, although an even better target than Thorgrim is going to be my hitting up these Rangers with the Manticores. The Rangers will rout off pretty easily. They generally take a lot of damage from Manticores. And with the charge in from my Marauder Horsemen too, that should be the end of the back line for Mucket. And given that I still have a unit of chariots left, really the biggest problem are these single entities. Another final transmutation to hit up these Master Engineers should get them very low. And in general, I think the Master Engineers are a fun pick, but they can have a pretty hard time paying for themselves, as it means that your front line is going to be a lot weaker. It's generally going to be pretty rough from here on out. Still, I'll have to be a tiny bit careful. Thorgrim Grudgebearer, Thorgrim Grudgebearer is no lord to be scoffed at. He's actually a pretty good combatant. He can do a good amount of damage to Sartorial, but thankfully for me, he does come in with magic damage. Sartorial actually has pretty nice magic resist stats. So not too bad, not to mention I have a full HP unit of warriors with great weapons, and they do pretty well against Thorgrim too. The Slayers will be pretty easily picked off by my infantry. They usually trade out pretty badly against infantry. And cycle charging from my Marauder Horsemen will give enough shock damage to really punish them too. So there we go, that's basically it. We'll just throw down a few debuffs to Thorgrim. Really focus on killing him off with Sartorial. Some Plague of Rusts. And then I guess throwing some javelins into him with my Marauder Horsemen. The double Manticore will be able to take him out. And then that's basically game. Usually when it comes to the dwarves, once their front line is down, it comes down to their single entities. And sometimes they can pull out, but in this case, poor Thorgrim, he's not going to really be enough to get that victory. So yeah, just closing it out. Thorgrim Grudgebearer, Barrel. Oh my gosh, I can't even read chat at this point. Yeah. How many times did I mispronounce his name? It is quite the mouthful. Oh my goodness. Dwarves and single entities in the same sentence. Yeah, if only dwarves had like a big monstrous unit. That'd be pretty nice. Give them a Carnosaur. That would make them pretty meta, I think. And really, it gets even worse too. I didn't even play this game perfectly. Usually, you can keep both of your chariots alive if you micro them well enough. Yeah, like you just have to make sure you're on point with your dodging. You keep an eye on the cannons, and when you see the flash of the shots going down, that's when you dodge. In this case, I did lose a chariot, but really just pushing through the front line was a bit too much. The hammers couldn't really pay for themselves. They do well against Chaos Warriors, but just way too much pressure on all sides. Got them routed off really quickly. They also don't have immune to psychology, so they rout off pretty easily. Master Engineers didn't really pay for themselves. Although everything sort of did okay on the dwarf side of things. Everything got pretty close to paying for themselves. But in the end, there wasn't much they could do. GG. But enough about dwarves. We have a Dark Elf game to go over. What do we got? Some Scourge Runners looking to hit up my single entities. Focusing my poor corpse cart. There's a lot of Dark Elf infantry over here. Let's see if I can shoo them away with my Fellbats. For the corpse cart, it will be slowly but surely healing up. And here we go, Fellbats are landing in. The dogs plus my Karen Wraiths are diving in. And we'll see if I can actually pick them off. Now, a lot of Winds of Magic is coming down to kill off this corpse cart. It's actually not too much of a problem, as honestly, I don't really use it too much anyways, but I'm tempted to give it a heal. Just, if only to have it eat up more Winds of Magic. It also helps in any blob infantry fights too, so I guess it is pretty important. And I'll give it a heal if another fireball comes in. As for the Dark Elf infantry, the Blackguard are going to be a bit of an issue to kill off. Scourge Runners aren't especially scary, because I do have so much mobility to actually catch them out, and most of my forces are actually infantry. Their damage comes in from their anti-large on their missile attacks, and if they're just firing at my whites, they actually don't do too much damage. In fact, they're much scarier against my like my Vargul and my what's this called, Black Coach, than everything else. So really not too much of a problem. I'll fly my bats directly over them to give them a bit of heat. And so far, the fact that the fireballs are mostly being used up means that my Vargulf is in a fairly nice position. It actually doesn't have to worry much at all about anything. And for these Slaanesha's Harvesters, I actually get a pretty devastating charge on them using my dogs to screen for the Harvesters. Actually getting in a ton of damage there. We'll have to throw down a bit of a heal to save those guys. And it's time to cycle charge with some single entity too. As for these Scourge Runner chariots, I can lock them down using the Fellbats, no problem. And for the Dark Elf infantry, a couple Scab Scraths should be enough to rout off this far unit of Spearmen. I'd use it on the Blackguard, but they have very high armor, and generally you don't want to use Scab Scrath on high armor targets. Much better used on the much weaker spears instead. Especially since most of these forces don't really line up very well for the Scab Scrath, so that's going to be the plan. As for my Karen Wraiths, I'm going to heal them up, the more Invocations of Nehek, and then my Chariot now is going to be the tool to kill off all of these Blackguard. It should do pretty well, although Blackguard are anti-large. The Chariot, it is going to be it's going to be a pretty nice tool, as long as I can keep it moving. Just sort of cycle charging between them means that I won't take too much damage, and then I'll slowly be able to pick them away. At this point, the Scourge Runner chariots are shut down too, and I have Graveguard in the back of these Blackguards, so I think this fight is more or less done. The Karen Wraiths really are, I need to focus a bit on actually keeping them alive, and same with this Black Coach too. I definitely don't want to be losing this thing, as it only gets more and more effective as the game goes on. So I'll keep it moving around as quick as possible, and it's going to pull towards my Vargulfs, or my single Vargulf, so that the Supreme Sorceress doesn't land on top of it and snipe it out. But there we go, it does actually crumble away. That's a bit unfortunate. It means that the infantry for the Dark Elves will be a tiny bit more effective, but they're so beat up at this point it shouldn't be too much of a problem. Double scab scrap, very nice for hitting up infantry. You can see it doesn't do much versus the blackguard though. Actually, basically no damage. Surprisingly small amounts of damage onto the blackguard, but as soon as I get them routed off, I'll be more than fine in this situation. The Vargulf too is still doing pretty well. It will be able to yeah, the Vargulf, it will be able to cycle charge the Blackguard too and get them off the battlefield soon enough. The White Kings, with their fairly high melee stats, do well there too. And the Supreme Sorceress now is even surrounded by the by my Karen rates, or no, by my Hex rates. So I think they should win that fight, especially since I'm pumping them with heals. And really the biggest threat left is the Scourge Runners. And basically no ammunition left. As long as I have the tiniest bit of mass, they won't be too much of a problem. Thunder Barge would be awesome. Yeah. I know I'm jumping back into the dwarf conversation, but I feel like, you know, if they make the Thunder Barge a really nice anti-air tool, that would totally send the dwarves into possibly some pretty nice prosperity in terms of the meta. Here we go, just closing out the game. What else really is there to go over? The Scourge Runners, even if I had no single entities, you can usually counter their cycle charging with Graveguard. They have decent mass and AP, so it's not too hard to just stand your ground and get decent damage on the Scourge Runners when they drive through. The White Kings too are really hard to cycle charge. And Vampire Counts also, they recently got, or all factions really, they got a buff to the mass on their infantry, which makes it much harder to cycle away. Now, some points to talk about here. This Corpse Cart, I feel like the fireballs were a bit wasted on it. More burning heads on my infantry to win that fight probably would have gone better. The Blackguard were a bit exposed. It was pretty easy to continuously cycle charge them. But I did miss micro with my Black Coach, and that did end up getting it killed. Probably could have played a bit safer on that front. But in general, this build is pretty scary. The Chillgeists, amazing value, as they do really well versus all Dark Elf Cavalry. Even the Slaanesh Harvesters, because they have magic damage. And the Fellbats, of course, are very important for shutting down any air cheese.